मार्क ने आपको बातचीत में कभी पहले बताया था कि इमरजेंसी में उनको क्या फेस करना पड़ा था जब इंडिया में इमरजेंसी और सेंसरशिप लगी थी तो?
Uh, I heard him talk about the emergency. I don't think he ever talked to me when we were correspondents together, but I heard him
Yes.
talk afterwards. There was a seminar actually in London, and he
हुँ,
talked about the emergency there. Um, I think he had contrasting feelings because being asked to leave the country at 24 hours notice, this was a real shock. He was being expelled from the country of his birth, expelled not for anything that he'd done, just simply for telling the truth and for giving a narrative which was true, but the one that the government didn't want to be heard. On the other hand, I think it also, the fact that he was targeted in that way was evidence that his journalism had an impact. And he wouldn't have been thrown out of India if his journalism didn't matter. So I think it was also demonstration of how important his journalism was. And indeed, although he spent 18 months in London, he was able to come back and to re-establish the BBC. And from then onwards, I mean, he was basically, India was his home throughout the rest of his life. He traveled a great deal. He spent time in London, but India was home from 1977 onwards. So in some ways, it helped to shape his life, but also the fact that he, within the BBC, it also cemented his reputation. Sometimes, when as a journalist you're a target of measures like that, it demonstrates that you're actually doing your job well, that you're not actually being blown by the political winds, that you're actually determined to tell the truth, and you will report what you believe to be the truth, whatever pressure is brought on you by governments and ministries and politicians. And Mark did that. So it hurt, but I think he was also proud of what he achieved in reporting through those difficult times before he was expelled and once he was allowed back into Delhi.
आपने भी और मार्क टुली ने भी ये काफ़ी डिफ़िकल्ट टाइम में इंडिया में रिपोर्टिंग करी, ख़ास करके उस समय जब ये राम मंदिर और बाबरी मस्जिद बनाम राम जन्मभूमि का जो मूवमेंट चला और अयोध्या में डिमोलिशन भी हुआ बाबरी मस्जिद का। तो आप लोगों को भी बाद में कभी गवर्नमेंट का प्रेशर या उस तरह का कुछ झेलना पड़ता था? You had to face any
Well,
pressure from
well,
government, you people?
well. I mean, of course, I only arrived in India a couple of years after the demolition of the Babri
Yes,
Masjid, and you would know better than anybody, Ramdat, what happened at Ayodhya that day. And you, I know, were with Mark and heard the crowds who were chanting against the BBC and took refuge and had to be helped to safety after several very perilous hours. I mean, of course, that was not directly government pressure, and although it was difficult getting news out from Ayodhya, he was able to do that.
yeah,
In
I'm not
my
talking about that particular incident. I'm talking in your time or when you were in Delhi bureau with Mark and
no, I mean,
what type of interference or not interference was
there was very little interference from the government. The government understood what the BBC did.
not like today?
Sorry?
Not like today?
That's for you to say, and I'll let you comment. I'm not going to go there. But
No.
yes, there was very little direct interference, and I remember, on occasions, it was possible when there was a big breaking story. I mean, it's amazing to think of it, but you could walk into North Block, South Block, just walk in with a camera crew in tow and knock on doors and see if a minister would talk to you.
Oh.
Without an appointment, sometimes in the evening. You couldn't do that now, and politicians were very accessible. I mean, Mark spoke to politicians of all persuasions. I interviewed Vajpayee, Advani, Malkani, all the prominent leaders of the BJP in a way that the BBC does not get to interview Narendra Modi or Amit Shah. Things have changed in that regard. I mean, sometimes in reporting Kashmir, there was a little bit of
annoyance.
There was, I wouldn't say annoyance. There was an attempt to make sure that you were always aware of what the government's line was. Nobody expected BBC journalists simply to follow what the government's line was. But even there, I mean, when I went to Kashmir, as I did on many times in the 1990s, the authorities there, and indeed the Indian Army there, they understood that journalists were wanting to get a range of views. Of course, journalists were going to talk to separatists and talk to people who disagreed with the Indian government. And broadly that was understood, and that was fine. I never got any real grief from that. I mean, there were some minor times when things were uncomfortable.
There was a space to tell the truth, and
yes, and I think access was good, and there was a very strong, and you know this, Ramdat, there was a very strong network of BBC correspondents in all the state capitals who were broadcasting themselves, but also providing information which would go to, which would inform Mark Tully's journalism as well. He knew that there were people he could turn to in Lucknow or in Bhopal or in Chandigarh or Mumbai, Kolkata, Patna, who he could ring up to, and journalists who, BBC journalists who were absolutely reliable and absolutely on top of the story. And that network was a great thing, a wonderful strength for the BBC and for its audiences. And that was, I think, that was very important to the BBC's success and to Mark's. And Mark always admitted, he acknowledged very generously the support he got from his colleagues. When Amritsar and the Golden Temple, he was working with Satish Jacob. At Ayodhya, he was working with you. And when he travelled, there were BBC journalists who were often helping, advising, and informing him, and that was a very important part of his success.